You're ever riding and one of your brakes is making a ton of noise, or you notice some friction coming from one of them? Probably because one of your rotors bent, or maybe that there's just some rub between one of your rotors and the caliper. Well, here's a couple quick tricks to get you back out there and riding. Let's start by flipping the bike upside down. When you spin the wheel, you can hear that disc rubbing on one of the pads, or potentially even touching the caliper. But we can tell that thankfully our disc is straight. You can see it doesn't look like it's wobbling at all when you spin it. If it was bent, you can use gloves and actually pull on the rotor itself and bend it back where you want it. Try not to touch the rotor too much with your fingers to get oils on it. In this case, it looks like the caliper and the rotor are just not aligned, and that's causing some rubbing and some friction, which is slowing us down and potentially wearing one of the pads down faster than the other one. The first thing we're gonna do is grab our multi-tool. Hopefully you have one in your pack or your swap box. And these are 5mm on Shimano SLX brakes. The idea is to have the rotor centered perfectly in there where there's a tiny bit of space on either side, and that'll keep it from actually rubbing or causing any friction. The first way to fix this is gonna keep the caliper slightly loose. We're gonna spin the front wheel and grab the front brake. And then we're just gonna tighten it exactly like this. Let's see how that went. Yeah, so that did the trick in this case. So now we're gonna just do it by sight. If that didn't work, it might be because the pistons aren't pushing out the brake pads equally on either side. I do this by trying to get a tiny space on either side of the rotor. And if you can, kind of check back and forth to see that tiny gap in between the brake pad and the rotor, then you'll know that it's not rubbing on either side. Hopefully you can spin it freely with no noise, no rub, and then slowly tighten down both bolts on the caliper to lock it in. Sometimes when you are tightening the caliper, it'll shift just enough to start rubbing again. So what you want to do is slowly tighten the caliper bolts while you're kind of spinning the tire and moving the caliper just the slightest bit in order to maintain those gaps on either side. It's a little bit more complicated, but again, sometimes it works if the pistons aren't perfectly dialed in. We're smooth sailing now. Hopefully those tips helped. Cheers.